Why do empires really fall? Money or battles? Who really holds power? Kings or their armies? Stay with me, because I'm going to show you exactly how money, armies, and power decided the fate of empires. Throughout history, one of the most devastating problems empires faced rarely appeared on the battlefield. It appeared in the accounting ledgers. Empires did not collapse primarily because of poor strategy, lack of courage, or weak leadership. They fell because they could no longer sustain the financial obligations of their armies. Armies do not survive on ideals alone. They survive on tangible expectations. Soldiers expect salaries, food, equipment, retirement benefits, and security for their families. In the ancient world, states did not have the ability to print money at will, issue sophisticated bonds, or rely on central banks. Running persistent deficits to keep the system afloat was impossible. Consequently, every major political power had to anchor its military forces to real and finite resources. These resources were often precious metals extracted from mines, fertile lands, forced labor, or taxes collected from conquered populations. The problem became acute when armies shifted from temporary militias to permanent institutions. At that point, war ceased to be merely a military challenge and became an economic imperative. If the payment chain broke, loyalty dissolved almost immediately. History repeatedly demonstrates that when pay loses its value or consistency, ideology and patriotism alone are insufficient to maintain order. The Roman Empire was one of the earliest civilizations to systematically address the challenge of military financing. At its height, it maintained a professional army of approximately 400,000 men spread across 3 continents. This was not a temporary fighting force called upon in emergencies. It was a permanent institution, a colossal organization embedded in the heart of the state. Roman soldiers received regular pay, earned retirement benefits, and were often granted land at the end of their service. These were not acts of generosity. They were necessary expenses to maintain the empire's survival. Rome's borders were not held together by patriotism alone. They were maintained because soldiers could rely on a predictable, trustworthy system of payment. At the core of this system was the silver denarius. The denarius was more than currency. It was a symbol of Roman authority. The emperor's image stamped on the coin represented the state's legitimacy and its capacity to pay. Taxes were collected in denarii, soldiers were paid in denarii, and Mediterranean trade relied on them. However, this system depended entirely on a steady supply of silver. The empire's expansion strategy was directly influenced by this financial necessity. The conquest of Hispania, for example, was motivated not only by security concerns, but by access to some of the richest silver mines in the known world. Rome literally relied on the ground beneath it to feed its armies. Imperial power was mined as much as it was fought for. Over time, Rome faced structural rather than purely military challenges. Easily accessible silver began to run out, mining became more expensive, borders expanded, and the costs of defense rose rapidly. Revenues, however, did not grow at the same pace. Faced with this imbalance, Roman leaders made a fateful choice. They began to debase the currency. The denarius maintained its outward appearance, but its silver content was gradually reduced, replaced with copper and various alloys. Official records continued to reflect unchanged salaries, but in reality, soldiers' purchasing power diminished. Initially, this masked the problem, but over the long term, it triggered a deeper crisis. Prices rose, trade became more difficult, and the savings of ordinary citizens were eroded. The army quickly responded. Soldiers demanded higher wages, bonuses, and privileges. Emperors who failed to meet these expectations were overthrown, sometimes violently, by those who could pay. Loyalty shifted away from the state and toward whoever controlled the treasury. The military ceased to serve Rome. Rome began to serve the military. Inflation crept silently but relentlessly, eroding trust and destabilizing society. Rome bought time through a monetary illusion, but in doing so, it lost the faith of the population that sustained it. Rome's experience was far from unique. Other empires confronted the same problem, each adapting it to their circumstances. The Assyrian Empire, for instance, did not pay its soldiers regular salaries. Instead, armies were rewarded through conquest itself. Plunder, captives, and land became the instruments of loyalty. This system depended entirely on continuous expansion. When campaigns stalled, soldiers lost discipline, and the state rapidly fragmented. Early Islamic states relied on taxation from conquered territories to fund military pay. Land taxes and trade revenues were collected centrally and redistributed to the army. As long as expansion continued, the system functioned smoothly. When borders stabilized, financial strain increased. In Han Dynasty China, the system relied less on money and more on an intricate bureaucracy. Taxes were collected in the form of grain, cloth, and labor. Peasants maintained roads, supplied granaries, transported goods, and supported military logistics. This centralized approach was remarkably resilient, though it imposed a heavy societal burden. The Aztec Empire, on the other hand, did not maintain a salaried army. Warriors were motivated by status, honor, and the tribute system. Conquered cities were required to deliver goods and people regularly. While highly organized, this system was brittle. If tributes stopped flowing, the empire collapsed almost immediately. These diverse examples point to the same truth. Armies always require tangible support. Whether it comes in the form of money, land, labor, or human tribute, the resource chosen shapes the structure of society itself. Modern states like to believe they have solved this ancient problem. Today, armies are financed through budgets, bonds, and digital payments. Wars are waged not through conquest, but through public spending and borrowing. Yet the underlying logic has changed little. Inflation serves the same function as the debasement of Rome's denarius. It allows governments to meet obligations without raising explicit taxes. Debt functions as a modern, abstracted form of tribute. Central banks have replaced silver mines. And, as always, the real cost is borne by populations who have little say in the process. Defense spending is generally protected. Social programs are debated first when budgets tighten. Power remains the priority. Empires do not collapse overnight. Trust erodes first. Economic balance falters next. And only then does the political structure crumble. Understanding economic history is therefore not merely an academic exercise. It is practical awareness. By observing how money flows to power and who gets paid first, one can anticipate systemic strain. Otherwise, history does not repeat itself overtly. It unfolds quietly, and the consequences arrive before the causes are fully understood. Stay with us for many more fascinating topics like this and keep watching our videos. If you haven't subscribed yet, hit the subscribe button to get notified about our new videos instantly.